now. So welcome everyone. My name is Hassan Hai. I'm with the customer success team here at Zorbit's Math Adventure, and we're located in St. John's, Newfoundland at a variety of different homes these days. I'm joined by Matt Murphy, my colleague, who I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment. He'll be the one doing all the heavy lifting today and running this webinar. I'm sort of going to be in the background doing a little bit of housekeeping and admin. First thing to share with you is that we are recording the session. So if, unfortunately, audio and video, sometimes they fluctuate a little bit during these sessions. I wish we could control the internet. We only do math right now. But if you find that your sound is cutting in or out or the video quality is off, with regrets, we can't fix that, but the recording we will be sharing. So if there's anything you missed, you can certainly get caught up there. During the session, and particularly because we'll probably have fewer people joining us in person, there's going to be lots of opportunity for Q&A. For those who are new to Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little button called chat. And if you click in there, you can post any questions along the way. Certainly pop in things. Most often, if you think of something, we're probably going to answer it in about 2 minutes. But don't be afraid. We'd rather you ask more questions that are answered anyways than being afraid to ask. Pop in questions there. We are going to pause regularly. Matt will be taking questions. It'll be interactive as much as you would like it to be. If there's nothing that you want to bring forward now, feel free to reach out to us after. So with that said, I will turn it over to Matt.
Thanks, Hassan. Hi, everyone. As Hassan mentioned, my name is Matt Murphy. I'm a former educator and currently one of the educational designers at Zorbit's Math Adventure. Have been working with the Zorbit's team for a little over 2 years. A big part of my role is working with teachers like yourselves to better understand how we use digital resources and resources at large to better understand how we can craft resources that will help teachers do what they do best, even better, and share some of the learnings that we take from our conversations with teachers worldwide and be able to share them back with our community. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, how do I do this? Not in its usual place. Check a few boxes and share, and you should all be looking at Zorbit's Math Planning and Assessment. And so my chat window and all my little boxes with your heads in them have disappeared. So if at any time, just turn on your microphone and feel free to interrupt me at any point. And Hassan's going to be watching the chat. So Hassan, I know you're not shy to chime in at a moment's notice if there's a question that we need to address. This is going to be a little bit different from our typical orientation session, knowing that there's a few teachers who have already had a chance to get in and explore. So we're not going to uncover every little detail of what's inside the Zorbit Math Adventure platform. We're not going to cover necessarily all of the how-tos, but if there is anything along the way that you want me to dig a bit deeper in, again, feel free to ask. And we have a lot of resources that'll help fill in some of those blanks. And at the very end of this session, we're going to make sure that everyone has our contact information. Because if you're anything like me, as soon as you hang up the call, you'll be like, oh, those are the 10 questions I meant to ask. So we want to make sure you can reach out to us very easily at a moment's notice. And Hassan and our friend Shane have become celebrities for their prompt service for those sorts of support requests. But what we are going to cover in today's session, we are going to focus on assessment and planning. To be more specific, we're going to be talking about ongoing intervention, which kind of goes hand in hand with assessment, and really assessment is part of that. When we look at intervention as a whole, there's 2 key questions that we're going to be really drilling in on that get to the heart of planning and assessment, why we do these things, where are my students, and what can I do about that. Before we dive into that, I'm going to show you just a quick overview. What is Zorbit's Math Adventure, just so we're kind of all on the same page in terms of what we're talking about, define some of the words that I'll be using throughout, like blended learning. Then we're going to work through, I'm going to use the example of multiplication, grade 3 concept. But if you have anything that you want to follow along with, at the very beginning, we'll have a quick moment to just kind of set our learning goals. What is it we want to cover next week, so that ideally at the end of this session, or if you're watching the video after the fact, at the end of the video, we've got a lesson plan ready to go for our next remote session, or at least we have a really great idea as to what this looks like when we do get back into the classroom. So I'm going to be kind of having a foot in both camps. You know, how do we deal with this today, and how do we deal with this, you know, when it's business as usual? So it's going to be kind of tricky line to walk, but hopefully we can, you know, check some boxes on both sides. So after we've set those learning goals, how do we find the resources, and how do we couple those with some of our teacher moves, some of the things that we do really well in the classroom? How can we, use the resources to bring those ideas to life? And then what happens after the fact? After that lesson has taken place, what can we do to support student development from there? So just take a quick moment, and if those of you who are on the line, if you want to put it into the chat, like what is it you want to teach tomorrow? Is it addition to 20? Is it spatial reasoning? Is it add place value addition? I'm going to be working through an example of multiplication, but if there's something that you want to explore as we're clicking through here, you want to open up your own Zorbit's dashboard and follow along, then let's just type it into the chat and say what our goal is. But before we get really start unpacking that and crafting that lesson, let's see what Zorbit's Math Adventure is and what is blended learning. We bill ourselves as a blended learning K-3 platform. And when we meet teachers, we like to kind of set the stage in terms of what we mean by blended learning. What is that? It's one of those buzzwords. You ask 10 different people, you get 10 different definitions. So when we talk about blended learning, we talk about using technology in conjunction with hands-on activities. So it's kind of the marriage of those two, the blend of those two. That's where the blend comes into the terminology. But it's more than just tech for tech's sake. We're not shoehorning technology into the classroom where it may not be the best choice of tool or mode of instruction. We talk about using technology very intentionally, with high levels of intent to augment the things that we're already doing in the classroom. I'm going to use that phrase probably a lot as we go through this session. We're augmenting these things that we're already doing in the classroom. So Zorbit's Math Adventure, we do have those digital resources. Of course, Zorbit's Math Adventure is the tool that people first meet when they meet Zorbit's Math, the platform, because it is, it's a really great game. It's a lot of fun. Kids love playing it, but more than just a really great game, it employs a math-first game design. So the more you get to play the game, the more you start to see the scaffolding that's built into it and the way that it drives student progression from one idea to the next, how it uses some of these models that we see in the classroom every day, but more importantly, how it embeds the math into the gameplay. So it doesn't foster that fixed mindset or that idea that math is a barrier. It's something we need to get over. It's an obstacle to the fun bits of the game. So when kids are playing Zorbit's Math Adventure, the math becomes the fun parts of the game. It's not something that we need to overcome. It's a tool that we're going to use to solve problems. And so as we start to explore some of these different gameplay examples, hopefully I'll be able to put my money where my mouth is when I say that, it's not chocolate covered broccoli. We don't shoehorn the math into an otherwise fun game. We try and make sure that kids are having a great time engaging with math. So that's where how we approach all of the tools that we have that go into the classroom. Now we also have hands-on tools, but I'm going to save my nerding out on how awesome those are for a little bit later when it's when we're into our teacher dashboard. But as students are playing the Zorbit's Math Adventure game, we also have a lot of assessment opportunities happening in the background. So as students are playing, we're automatically collecting in real time curriculum-aligned performance data. And so we are answering those questions. I talked earlier about this idea of intervention, and we're going to keep revisiting it as we go through this lesson planning process. We're trying to answer those questions. Where are my students and what are my next steps? So we offer some really specific quantitative data, and more so than just the numbers, it really highlights where some of the students may be struggling or what strategies they're really good with, but what strategies they need a little bit extra support with. Of course, we don't just say, here you go, here's your data, time for you teachers to go to work, we're out. We try and stay in your corner through the entire process and make some recommendations as to what we can bring back into that classroom. And part of the recommendation system involves taking some of those activities out of the teaching activities library and saying, hey, these are some activities that we think your students will benefit from, based on what we've identified from their gameplay. These are some areas that we think that could use some attention, and here's some ideas as to how you can give them that attention. And even within these activities, we're providing some recommendations as to key questions for teachers to ask so that they can better ascertain where are my students, better to, these are the types of questions that are going to illuminate the learning and the strategies that students are using, and then make some recommendations. Are they struggling? Well, here's some ideas that'll help support them. If they're have already got kind of the core idea that's at the heart of this activity, here's some extensions and variations to help further enrich that learning. So that closes that loop. And, in terms of the entire teaching and learning process, we have our blended learning resources that take place, that really shine in the classroom and these days at home. We have the assessment pieces that are always running in the background, not just the quantitative data that's being collected by the dashboard, but all of the resources kind of set the stage for rich observation. So again, that blended piece of technology and things that you're already doing comes to life in that assessment phase. And then we use that data to help make recommendations to what we can do next. Whether it be something that's hands-on or refining some of the controls associated with the game, which we'll explore in just a moment. So now that we've kind of skimmed the tops of the trees as to what Zorbit's Math Adventure is, I want to talk about how we can use the tools to craft a lesson. Once you kind of get the ball rolling, these recommendations start cycling through, the data is being collected, but that first one can be a bit challenging to implement. How do we get the ball rolling? So I'm going to be talking about multiplication, but I'm not just going to jump right into multiplication times tables. One of the things that you'll find, or rather, one of the things you'll not find in Zorbit's Math Adventure are worksheets that just approach the learning from just that procedural fluency perspective. Instead, we try and approach the learning from a more holistic perspective. We try and take all of the different strands of proficiency as identified by NCTM and try and bake those into everything that we're doing. So when I said we're going to set our learning goals, I didn't just mean this is the objective that we want to cover, right? That's the content, but the learning goal is how do we want to present that? What is it we want to come out of this lesson? Do we want students to just have procedural fluency with multiplication? That's certainly a worthy goal, but if we're just starting talking about multiplication, then starting with something like conceptual understanding might be a bit more productive, because the same resource that gives these different strands names claims that procedural fluency comes out of conceptual understanding. And if we think about the way students learn, that makes a lot of sense in terms of they have this understanding of the world. They come to the class with this pre-existing knowledge or cognitive structure. And if we can kind of take that and show them something or let them discover why it is that multiplication works the way that it works, then they'll start to be able to connect those dots a little bit easier, and then procedural fluency or that automaticity will start to develop. So this is something that we want to keep in mind as we're looking for the different resources. How is it that we want to approach a given concept? And also another thing, while we're talking about some of the developmental frameworks in Zorbit's Math Adventure, as we're exploring some of the activities, this is just a quick little plug that we do try and keep the CPA trajectory into our resources as well. We don't just jump straight to the abstraction of numerals. We want to show them those visual models. We want to get them working with these ideas before we start generalizing them and making them abstract with 2 + 3 = 5 or 2 × 3 = 6, right? That's kind of meaningless unless we've got something that we can picture in our heads that kind of explains why 2 × 3 would equal 6. So as we're exploring some of the activities, like I said, we're not just going to jump straight into the abstraction of numerals. We're not just going to jump straight into procedural fluency and start drilling times tables, saying this is how we need to memorize them. Instead, the way that the game is structured is that it's going to leverage everything that they've done in grade 1 and grade 2, where they've dealt with strategies like doubling or adding equal groups or repeated addition, and that's where that's kind of going to be our entry point. We're not going to jump right into multiplication. We're going to kind of remind them of some of the things that they've already done by approaching the strategy of repeated addition. So we're going to show that visual model that there's, by adding equal groups or even different equal groups, we can arrive at the same number. Eventually, we'll get into an activity that takes the idea of an array or an area model and gives them the environment in which they can start toying with this. We start off relatively straightforward because we don't want them getting too confused. We want to show them, well, what is an area model? How does it work? How do we use a rectangle to carve out an array of 15? And what do the different dimensions of this rectangle tell us? So they start to toy with this, and eventually they'll get to a point where they can tinker with those arrays in a more open environment, an environment that requires a little bit more critical thinking. So it's not just math for math's sake. We're using these ideas of multiplication within a context to solve a larger problem. And so as students start to explore this, they'll not only realize that, hey, these arrays, these visual models are really useful when I'm trying to solve these types of problems, but there's multiple ways that I can approach this. So getting back to that idea of students come to the table with their own pre-existing understanding, their own biases in terms of how they approach different problems. We don't want to say, you didn't approach step one the right way, so you're kind of, we're up the creek for the rest of the strategy. Instead, we want them to show us, where would you start? And based on that, where do you go next? And is this a fruitful avenue for you to continue to explore? And if so, great. If you got a different answer than me, or got the same answer a different way, well, that's fantastic. And eventually, we will get to that procedural fluency piece, because I don't want to say that knowing your times table is not worth our time. It certainly is. But if we've gone through the repeated addition, the additive reasoning phase that brought us to the multiplicative reasoning phase, where we started to toy with different visual models and then transition into the abstraction of numerals and the times tables, that progression is going to happen a lot more easily, or so the research suggests. So all of that being said, how do I find those things? If I know that I want to approach multiplication from a conceptual understanding perspective, the Zorbit's universe is a vast expanse. How on earth do I, pardon the pun, how on earth do I find the content I'm looking for? Well, I'm going to show you now how to use the Zorbit's platform, how to find your resources, how to test it out to make sure that the activities are what you expect them to be, or that, so at least you know going in what your students are going to see. And then how we can guide the in-game experience so that students are pointed in the right direction. So in my teacher dashboard, I'm not going to go through a lot of the setup phase. Again, we have some videos that you can reference, or if you want me to explore that at the end, I certainly can, or contact us and we'll answer whatever questions you have about that. But my class is already set up, it's ready to go. So I'm at the point now where I'm ready to start looking for multiplication activities. We're currently working on a game guide that's going to make this very, just 1 or 2 clicks and you've got everything that you need. In the meantime, the way that we've got this organized is that if you look in your class progress area, this is where all of that data is being collected, but it's also a great organizational structure to see what sort of concepts are in the game, what sort of math concepts are on specific planets, and how they're all organized. So knowing that I'm dealing with multiplication, well, I can see it's under operations. That makes sense. Multiplication, division, there's a couple of different operations here. If I click on any of these dots, normally I'd be able to see, how Charlie is specifically doing on all of these things. But what it also shows me is what's present in the game. So I've got multiply by 2, 3, 4, and 5. All of these are different modules within the game. So knowing that this is how it's organized, well, let's go find that content. Let's go see what it looks like in the game. We have this play button over here, and this is going to bring you to your teacher sandbox. This is a version of the Zorbit's game that has absolutely everything unlocked. So you can explore any activity on any planet at any time. The game controls you configure are not going to be reflected here, nor are the assignments. This is simply just, everything is open for you to explore, which makes it great for if you're doing a math talk in the class, you want to explore different areas, or in multiplication. So we're dealing with grade 3. I know the deltacular area is the grade 3 area, even though it doesn't say grade 3. We did that so that students can explore. We can send students where we want to without having, for example, a grade 2 student seeing the word kindergarten flapped across the screen. If you're not sure which is which, we've given a sort of a hint to the sequential nature of them by naming them alpha, beta, gamma, delta. Kindergarten 1, 2, and 3. Let's go into the grade 3 area. And this interface is going to change very soon too. We're going to make this a little bit more user-friendly so that all of the planets are out front. That's coming like in the next week or so. Don't quote me on that. We might be off by a week or 2. And so if I'm not sure what planet it's on, well,
Moon
measurement,
2R.
it's not
Scramblers
geometry.
Art Gallery.
Here it is here, Aurora Farms, that's
Farms.
multiplication. Now, which planet it corresponds to which is also visible in our game. A
Matt,
few clicks. Yeah.
you may want to kill the sound on the game. Otherwise, I don't think we can hear you.
Okay. Let's see. That's just going to take a second. Open.
There.
Volume. Sir, let's turn off the volume because as soon as I click back in, that's going to jump up again. Let's turn down Chrome. There we go.
Perfect.
Technology, huh? So we're going to land on Aurora Farms, and one of the things that we're going to see is that the way that the planet is organized is there's different nodes that correspond to different game modules. We're going to skip this little narrative. It is a fun little story. You're going to meet Dinah McDunkel and her farmhands, the Wheatleys. But as we click around, we'll see, well, these are some of the same titles that we saw a moment ago in our class progress areas. We got multiplication by 2, by 3, by 4, and as we start to explore, we'll see those different modules. We can jump way over to division. This is the planet that we're going to find multiplication and division concepts on. So if I jump into this one here, I can see some of those ideas. There's that watering can activity we just talked about. There's the harvesting activity, and of course then that one that we talked about where we're going to rewire, we're going to fix some of the circuitry, which is that procedural fluency piece. So all of those activities are here for the students to explore. Of course, this is the teacher sandbox, so everything has been unlocked. Some of these may be locked for the students. They need to get 5 or 6 different stars in order to progress and finish the module. But the point being is that if I'm not sure how an activity plays or what specifically students are going to see, this is where I can come in and vet that content. So we found it in the class progress area. We found sort of where it lives and how it's organized. We've vetted it in our teacher sandbox. Now, how do we point students in the right direction? Well, that's where our game controls come into play. When I set up my classroom, it's going to ask me what grades I want to teach, which means that some of them may already be turned off. I'm not teaching kindergarten, grade 1 or grade 2, so those are already off. Grade 3 is on, so if I want students to just focus on multiplication, I want to turn these other planets off so that they can't land on them. They'll still see them, they'll be silhouettes, and we'll see that in just a moment. But this is how I can point students in the right direction rather than, exploring, at their leisure, the different concepts. There are benefits to that as well, to give students the opportunity to just kind of explore, particularly if they're playing at home. Giving them content or agency over what they want to explore is fantastic. But if we're doing this in class and we want this as part of a center-based lesson, this is how we can make sure that when students log into the game, they're focused on the content that I want them focusing on. If I want to drill down even further, and this is how we can make this gameplay even more intentional, particularly in this era of remote learning, what I've seen a lot of teachers doing is creating weekly assignments. So telling the parents that every week there's going to be something brand new for your kids inside the game. So log in every Tuesday after lunchtime, and there's going to be a brand new assignment there. And this is a way that teachers are keeping their curriculum plan on the rails and maintaining contact with their students and staying in control of where they want to send students next in their learning trajectory. So the create an assignment button opens up this little stepper. I'm not going to walk through step by step how to make this. Again, we've got lots of great videos that'll take you through that. But once it's created, you're going to see this progress data being collected. We can see how students are doing with the different concepts, how much time they've spent on it, and based on that time, how much progress they've made. I can see Elizabeth hasn't started. Maybe she doesn't have ready internet access. Maybe there's an accessibility issue there that I know about. And if it's something that it is of concern, well, here's a cue for me to reach out to the parents and say, hey, I've got some offline activities that I think Elizabeth is really going to enjoy if she can't get into the game or doesn't learn digitally very well. So that's our assignments tool and how we can craft those assignments to point students in the right direction. So we've talked about guiding the experience with the game controls, and of course we can personalize that for individuals. We can set it for the entire class, or as this little GIF is showing here now, we can turn off those checkboxes to customize the access. Or we can create those assignments to create custom in-game missions, and of course we can personalize those as much as we want as well for the students. So if there's 5 students who want to be working on multiplication multiples of 5, but other students really need additional support on that additive reasoning piece, we can create 2 separate assignments and deliver to the two groups of students. And when we've done that, well, this is what it looks like. You'll notice that some of those constellations have been removed. We've got the kindergarten and grade 1 available. Some of the planets have been turned off. I often tell kids that it's nighttime on those planets, and it's not safe for Zorbit to land a ship in the dark. And they're usually like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and then move on. but it's a great way to make sure that the focus is on the content that we want them focusing on. And of course, the assignments, they live as a layer above the core gameplay. So students can still explore the planets that you've made available to them. But if they go into their backpack, they're going to find that custom mission that you've created for them. And of course, they don't need to complete the assignment to get back into exploration mode. But if you really want them focusing on that assignment, then just turn off all of the other planets so that the only thing they can see are the assignments that you've delivered.
Matt?
Yes.
Sorry, I waited for the transition of slides to jump in there.
Yeah.
Just doing a quick time check. So we're about 30 minutes, about 50% of the way through the PD. Might be an opportunity to just, whenever you're ready, just take a little pause for some questions as well.
Yeah, I'm ready right now. That was a great time.
Sure. So we have a small crew, so we have the chat, and certainly feel free to unmute yourselves, anyone on the call. Any questions so far, or any comments on how you're using assignments, maybe what we were just talking about? Okay, if there is, again, this is an interactive session, so feel free to jump in there, just unmute yourself and pop in, or certainly post it in the chat, and then I can be the bad guy and interrupt Matt, and take a break for questions. Okay, Sherry's all good. All right, I think we can go on then, Matt.
All right, let's carry on. All right, so we found our resources that we want to use in the game, and we've configured the game such that students are pointed in the right direction when they log into the game. Now, one of my favorite phrases or adages, and as we go through this, is you get to know me better. I love analogies, and I love these little, like, somewhat poetic, short, punchy taglines. Like, it's not the resource, it's what you do with it. You know, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And, you know, we can make all of the amazing resources in the world, but if they're not being used with intentionality, if we don't think about what they look like in the classroom or pair them with our own teacher moves, you know, they can fall short. And of course, that's not what they're designed to do. They're not designed to replace the things that you're doing. They're designed to augment the things that you're already doing. So let's flex our teacher moves and start thinking about what this looks like in context. So the game is fantastic. We looked at some of the different developmental frameworks baked into it. The way that it adapts is really robust to offer students personalized experiences. But again, getting back to this idea of blended learning, we don't think students should have their noses buried in a screen all day, every day. So let's have a look at some of the hands-on activities that we can explore as well. And more to the point, how we can find ones that are relevant to the lesson plan that we're creating. So we went into our class progress earlier to kind of get our bearings to see, well, what's the content we want to focus on. So let's do that again. Let's come in here and see multiplication. Well, all of these things are just kind of multiples of different numbers. So I could click on these specifically, but I'm going to think a little bit more generally. I'm going to see the View Teaching Activities button down here. And this is going to bring me to one of my favorite areas where I have a tendency to nerd out real hard on some of the items in here. So Hassan, please pull on the reins if I'm going down some rabbit holes here. But the teaching activity, what's that?
All right, I'm keeping an eye on you, Murph.
All right, you keep me honest. So the teaching activities library, I mentioned earlier, the one thing you will not find in here are worksheets. These are activities, they're lesson plans, they're games, they're exploration activities that are designed to keep the learning very social, very collaborative, and very playful. So there's kinesthetic activities in here. There's a lot of really great math talks in here. One of my favorites is multiplication roll-off. And I think it really talks to the way that we approach a simple idea, but in a very playful manner. So what we do with this one is, you can see it comes with some instructions and some of those extension questions. What we do is we roll 3 dice. We pick any 2 of them and multiply those numbers together, and we claim a number on the number line. We kind of take turns back and forth, or we can work collaboratively. We can work together and try and cover as much of the number line together as possible, or we try and take the, try and do a capture the flag or a risk style game where we try and own as much of the number line as possible before the other player can grab it. So it's a really fun game for students to play. There are some like low floor, high ceiling components here in that at one aspect of it, we're kind of just practicing our multiplication skills, right? We're practicing that procedural fluency or that automaticity by continuously multiplying 2 numbers. And so in doing so, students are developing that procedural fluency, but they're doing so in a really fun and playful manner. This is not that worksheet that's going to take 20 minutes or a half an hour or an hour, depending on how confident they feel with those math facts. It's something that they can play together and develop those skills naturally and in an enjoyable way. But the high ceiling of this is that, you start asking questions like, if I rolled 2 sixes and a 4, do I take 36 or do I take 24? 24 is easier to make because there's more combinations. And that could be an argument as to why I would take it or why I would wait till later, depending if it's, a collaborative or a competition style game. 36 is very difficult to make. There's not many combinations that will make that. Actually, it's only the 2 sixes. So do I grab that now while I can as strategically, or do I leave that because it's going to be just as difficult for my opponent to grab it later as well? And so it's got those number lines baked in there as well for you to print off and use. But the key thing here is that it's a simple idea. We're practicing our multiplication skills, but we're doing it in a very playful manner. So that's me nerding out a little bit on what's in this teaching activities library. Getting back to kind of our way in here was that I wanted to find some activities that I can pair with the in-game experience to craft that lesson. So if I create an assignment focused on multiplication and send home this multiplication roll-off game, and maybe if I get the opportunity to actually work face-to-face with my students through Google Meet or Zoom or whatever you're using, if you have that time with your students, maybe I can even pull in some math talks and get them thinking about different ways to use multiplication in a creative problem-solving scenario, or a great way to kind of go into the conversation as a bit of an icebreaker. So all of these things are designed. This is just one activity that I unpacked. There's a lot of really great ones in there. And like I said, they're designed to be very playful, very kinesthetic, and design thinking and creative problem solving. They're a lot of fun. Furthering that line of, what are our teacher moves, when we get back into the classroom, we see a couple of different implementation strategies quite pervasively. And one is that, we just sit down one-on-one with our kids and we watch how they're playing the game. We ask them questions, why did you put that there? What's your first step? These types of questions help us see what's going on in the kids' heads, as well as it helps illuminate that learning and helps us keep that formative assessment going. Individual practice is something that they're probably going to be doing these days because, of course, we are social distancing. But if we're guiding students in the right direction, if we're using the assignments, using the game controls, that individual practice can be very, very pointed and intentional. We also see it being used as center-based learning. I'm not going to go too in-depth right now as to how that works because, like I said, we're kind of dealing remotely now, and this is specifically a classroom implementation. But pairing those activities with the hands-on activities that we just saw in the teaching activities library is a great way to kind of craft 3 or 4 different stations piece together in a center-based lesson. And of course, my favorite, Hassan, I'm going to need you on standby here because we're about to talk about math talks. I already kind of tipped my hand a little bit in terms of, where to find them. But the whole point of these and what makes them a really great icebreaker or conversation starter or way into a new idea is the diagnostic opportunities here and the way that it encourages student voice and student agency in terms of how they approach problems. So here's one. This one's more of a kindergarten grade 1 entry point, but can be used at any grade. Of course, you're looking at this and you're saying, okay, the answer is 9. And that's not very exciting. It's not really the point. The answer that there's 9 dots here is not the point of a math talk. The point is, how did you find 9? What path did you take to get there? And even with something as simple as how many dots are there, there's a lot of really interesting things that we could hear from the students. A lot of really cool things that the students are going to tell us. Like Mary is seeing 3 groups of 3. She's ready to take that additive reasoning to the next step into that multiplicative phase. LeBron is thinking about inventory. He's a very business-minded individual because he's taking stock of the different colors. Ali is counting on his fingers, probably using cardinality. He's early on in his numeracy development. We've got some more subitizing opportunities that we need to present to Ali. And Christine sees Christine is after my own heart because this is what I always see. I see that pyramid up top and the 3 down below. And of course, 6 plus 3 is 9. So the way that they see these is really interesting. And students get really excited when they see, hey, there's a million ways for me to see this. I'm going to share my strategy or my approach. It's really exciting. If anyone's uncomfortable with doing math talks and say, I don't know how I would lead that, I would suggest starting with a which one doesn't belong. And we've got some really great resources both on YouTube as well as in your teaching activities library to help you facilitate that. All of these packages come with questions to ask that you can help drive that conversation. And if you do have get to talk to your kids on Zoom or when you're back in the classroom, it doesn't have to be pictures. Bring in 4 objects and show, like, which one do you think doesn't belong? Or ask questions like, can you think of a reason why the baseball doesn't belong or why the football doesn't belong? So these are really fun conversation starters for people who are looking to expand their repertoire of teacher moves. So we've crafted that lesson. We've used the Zorbit's game. We've pulled out some of those activities from the teaching activities library. They're all pointed at multiplication. We even thought about using a math talk at the beginning of that lesson, whether we do it in real time in person, over a Zoom meeting, or even present it in our Google Classroom and say, hey, here's a conversation starter. Just give me 10 seconds of your thoughts as to how you'd approach this. Even asynchronously, they can work. But what happens after that lesson, after we've done? How do we reflect and respond to what's been going on? One of my favorite analogies I mentioned earlier, I love analogies in case I haven't brought it up already. This analogy breaks down pretty quick. But again, there's something oddly poetic about this idea of formative assessment being when the chef tastes the soup. It's very, non-invasive. It's kind of part of cooking the soup. And what's most important is the chef has the chance to change the trajectory of that soup. They get the chance to, there's still time to add salt or a bay leaf or to do something to help that soup really shine. Summative assessment, that one gets kind of tough because, it's learning is not consumable. It's not perishable necessarily. But getting back to this idea of formative assessment, how do we taste digital soup? How do we keep that soup from burning if it's, across town? So one of the ways that we help support that in a digital environment is by offering that second set of eyes that hopefully validate some of your own observations in the classroom. But while we're dealing with remote learning, you can keep track of what students are doing in the game, more importantly, how they're doing with those different concepts and what we can do next. So even at the homepage here, we're showing some high-level trends as to what's going on in your classroom based on their in-game performance. And here's some recommended activities that we think will help. Well, let's dig a bit deeper. We looked at our class progress area a moment ago as a way to kind of get our bearings as to how things are organized. But now that students have been playing the game, it's going to start lighting up. My Sandbox account is not as colorful as some of these screenshots, so I'm going to stay here on the slides for the time being. But at a glance, we can see some individual trends, like Charlie struggling across the board or has some key areas that I need to spend some extra time with Charlie. I've been working with Charlie all year, though. This is not news to me. But what is interesting is that it gives me those sort of entry points, those things that I need to prioritize, like addition. If I look vertically, I can see, whoa, this is one of the most challenging scenarios the teacher can face. If everyone was struggling, well, the next steps would be pretty straightforward. We need to dig deeper on addition or approach it a different way. But Sean's getting it. Jinju's doing okay. Lavin and Charlie are really struggling. So I've got a wide range of abilities here. So this is where I would start talking about that center-based learning approach or small group instruction. But regardless, we're not going to go down that avenue right this second. Instead, let's get a better idea as to what Charlie's problem might be with addition. And when we click on that, we're going to see that concept report that we saw earlier in the session. And I mentioned that it kind of highlights what strategies he's doing well with and where he's struggling. The fact that he's doing quite well with addition to 10 and struggling with addition to 20 tells me that a couple of things might be happening. Maybe he's counting on his fingers and, can't take the socks off. He can start using his toes. Whatever the case may be, maybe he has his math facts memorized, and whether he's using cardinality or rote memorization, whatever the case is, it's not scaling to larger numbers. So this is my cue as the teacher to think, I've got to present Charlie with some more scalable strategies at those smaller numbers, playing with those numbers a little bit more authentically and a little bit more visually, and then he'll start making those connections, and then we can start giving him those larger numbers and see if those strategies scale. So that's a mouthful. That's easier said than done, right? So instead of just showing you this data, we're going to make some recommendations as to what we can do about that. And that's going to bring us back into that teaching activities library, where we're going to start pulling some of those activities that we saw, like multiplication roll off, or in this instance, we're focused on addition. So we're going to look at, using 10 frames, using number paths, subitizing different dot patterns on dice or tally marks, and using those ideas, those models to help facilitate that addition and those sophisticated strategies.
Matt.
So may mean, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just a little time check here. So we're at about 45 minutes in, about 15 minutes to go.
Yep.
There you
I
go.
got 2 slides left, I'm pretty sure.
Right.
Yeah. Good keeping me honest, though. I appreciate it. So as part of that intervention piece, or that follow-up piece, so we looked at the teaching activities library. We pulled some of those activities that are going to facilitate that the introduction of those different strategies. But we may also notice that he's really struggling with these concepts in the game. Maybe there's some different models inside the game that are going to support him back at the kindergarten level. Again, we're not going to slap the word kindergarten across the screen for poor old Charlie. We want him to feel like he's being productive, encountering that productive struggle without him thinking that, oh, I must be operating below grade level. I must not be a math person, which is a phrase that has plagued the math community for far too long. So refining the game controls and personalizing Charlie's access to respond to that data, or creating those custom assignments, as we mentioned a moment ago, to target his specific needs or concepts or strategies that I want Charlie focusing on. Maybe I can do something intentional and specialized for Charlie. So that's it. That's the end of my my rant. We talked about what Zorbit's Math Adventure is, how the different tools work, and more importantly, how they work together to create that whole lesson plan and lesson delivery workflow. We went in and set, based on some learning goals that we set, we found some resources, we vetted those resources, and we pointed students right in the right direction. We paired those with some teacher moves, like some different implementation strategies, perhaps some math talks, some individual practice, or perhaps some center-based learning. And then after that lesson took place, we were able to look at our own observations, as well as some of the data that was being collected by the teacher dashboard, and pull from those recommendations and start responding in terms of what are we going to do next when we get in front of our students, or the next time we send home a weekly update email to parents, or whatever that looks like. So that brings us back into the classroom, and just like the rinse and repeat in terms of using these tools to help facilitate a lesson and how to respond to the outcomes. So there's our contact information. I already mentioned why I'm going to give these to you, because if you have any questions, or if you're watching this this video, I want to make sure that you can get in touch with us very easily. So there's our email address. Hassan and Shane are available at the support email. If you want some support in terms of just lesson planning, say I'm teaching edition to 20 next week, what have you got for me, Matt? Feel free to reach out to me directly. As a former teacher, I love nerding out on lesson planning. So message me at your own risk. We might go down a big nerd rabbit hole, but if you have, I'm always delighted to support teachers in any way I can. Of course, we've got lots of fun stuff happening on Twitter and Facebook, but Twitter seems to be the most pervasive network for teachers' personal learning networks these days. So there's our Twitter handles for you to follow along. That's
Great.
it. Hassan, back over to you. Are there any questions?
Perfect. I have no questions. It was a very thorough presentation.
Oh, good.
But I wonder if anyone else might have any questions or comments, and whether it's related to this content or anything in general. We do have about 10 minutes. We're certainly not in a rush, but we want to be respectful of your time. I know there's a lot of Google Meets, and there's a lot of priorities on teachers that you might not want to sit in a webinar with Zorbit's folks all day. So feel free to pop it in the chat. You're welcome to unmute and pop in any questions. And if you think of anything after, you can certainly send it to Sherry or directly to us, whatever you're most comfortable with. Out of curiosity, is everyone who's on this call, is everyone using Zorbits currently, or is maybe anyone not using Zorbits currently? Whichever, you can answer either way.
I can't speak for the 3 that are on here. I just know that everyone was given access, but that doesn't mean necessarily that they're using it. But it's not too late. It's very easy to set up. And if any of you three want help with that, I just shoot me an email and I'll help you get on, or I usually send you in to these guys and then they'll help you.
Yeah,
Um,
perfect.
but I appreciate your webinar for sure. I love the way you can give kids other places to be on the program without them knowing where they are. Love that. And I love the hands-on manipulative conceptual ideas behind all of your gaming. So just thank you, and I appreciate it. And I will send this video to the rest of the crew, and we may end up with lots more questions too.
Perfect. One thing, so there's a couple of comments in there. So Christina mentioned that she's not currently using it, but will be now. So mission accomplished. We won one over, one more. Shauna mentioned that you're feeling more comfortable with Zorbits. And Heather has mentioned that some of her students are using it already. So, you know, it's a mixed bag from not using it, going to, and already using it. So that's great. We love having sort of diverse user experiences. For anyone who is working, I mean, if you're talking to your teacher colleagues, so we are currently offering access to Zorbits for teachers free. And that access will continue through until the end of July. So I know, Sherry, you had been asked from one of your principals, I think. So we've extended it a little beyond the end of the school year to give a bit more of a runway. So it's not as abrupt an end for, I guess, particularly families, as, you know, they check out and maybe they're hoping they still have something to use. And I'll just take a moment here, Sherry. I did send you some information regarding anyone looking to continue with Zorbits for next year. That's a whole other conversation. I don't want to bring that up in this meeting, but for anyone inquiring about that, there is some stuff that can be shared around. For any teachers who are looking for access still, so I mean, I was mentioning that it's still open. You can still sign up for an account. So if anyone you're talking to, any of your peers you think would be interested, maybe had hesitated, there's still a solid 2+ months of being able to use it. So it's not too late to get started. Even if you're just going to explore it, even if you're not going to introduce it to your students at this point, it's a great opportunity to dive in and just check out a resource that you might want to consider for next year as well. Great. Perfect.
Thanks for opening it up through July. That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Please share that broadly. Certainly when anyone reaches out to us, we're letting them know. That includes so we had separate access available for parents directly. So they asked us, pardon me, let me find my words again now. If parents reach out to us asking for access directly, we're able to provide them direct access to the game alone. They don't have access to the dashboard like the way a teacher would. So for any of those parents who have independent accounts for their children, that access will also be extended through until end of July. But of course, we would always encourage, if they're working with their teacher, for them to use the account set up by their teachers, because of course, then their teacher, their child's teacher, has control over what that experience is and can use it with intention. Otherwise, it's really just free gameplay. Perfect. So I'm going to, if there's no other questions, I'll end the recording now. And probably by tomorrow, Sherry, I'll have this recording ready to share with you, and then of course share it broadly throughout your teacher group.